Nurses of psych wards, what did a patient do that left you speechless? This was actually in a state hospital that is part of the prison system for mentally ill offenders. Patient asked for Vaseline. Which is fine. They can have Vaseline, whatever. But this patient was given a whole tub, so of course he stripped completely naked, covered himself in Vaseline, and ran. It was a secure unit, and he didn't escape, but we couldn't get him back into his cell all shift because he was too ducking slippery. No more tubs. I was a CNA for about 4 years and the saddest ever was my client/resident constantly thought I was her daughter. She went to Harvard and was an extremely brilliant lady in her time. She was non-verbal but every time I walked into a room she would exclaim, "Elizabeth, you came." I loved this lady so much. She would only eat when I fed her. She was extremely combative with everyone but me. I ended up quitting my job there but visited her every single day. To the point that her family kind of accepted me as their family. I finally found out that Elizabeth took her own life at 21 and the fact that she thought I was her gave her extreme joy. I never corrected her and I like to think I gave her peace when she passed holding my hand. She was an amazing lady and I miss her to this day. Prison guard here, guy cut his scrotum open to let people know he was serious, don't know about what. Guy 2, cut off a butt cheek, or a big part of, and threw it at me as I tried to stop him. Guy 3, punched a wall 3 times really hard, bloody knuckles, and told me he punched the devil cause he was telling him to stab me but I'm cool so he told the devil to duck off. Guy 4, pretended to drown himself in a toilet, basically splashed pee on his face and rolled around crying. Guy 5, had sex with a window air vent and was compliant yet confused when I asked him to stop. Those were the days. Psych ward counselor here. Early in my career I had a teenage girl with suicidal ideas and severe depression. The year before, on Thanksgiving, her dad pulled a gun from under the dinner table and blew his brains out in front of everyone. I normally form a response pretty quickly, even a wow, but when she told me I got quiet, leaned back, exhaled, and had to gather my thoughts. Not a nurse, pharmacist. Had one of our clozapine patients miss a monthly meeting to discuss their medication. Called around, found out she was in the ICU having eaten 2 of her own fingers, then visited her mother for coffee, still bleeding. Had a friend tell me of another patient, made a cut in his thigh and reopened it regularly until the whole thing was a scar tissue cavern, by some miracle avoiding infection. Started using his meat pocket to hold pens and coins and anything he could collect in his ward. Nobody knew until a paperclip pierced the side and he finally wound up with an infection that took him to ICU where they found his stash. Not me, but someone I knew was in a ward with a girl who wanted to be a vampire and drank blood from her own tampons. It's as atrocious as it sounds. She was around 16 and schizophrenic. I'm not a nurse but was a patient once. Giant dude got upset. One dude changed the channel from a football game he was watching and smashed his skull with his fists. Not fully, but enough that when they brought him back a few days later he started seizing and had to be removed again. Didn't see him again. Also, there was one lady who was straight out of the movies. Walking around preaching the end of days loudly and sweating like crazy. Not me, but my dad used to work in Airedale and J Ward, Australian Insane Asylum and Prison for the Criminally Insane, respectively, in the 70s. He used to talk about sunny days in J Ward where they'd bring out all the inmates during a sunny day and they'd promptly line up and start jacking off. In Airedale they dealt with the jacking off problem by strapping you into cotton mittens, but a lot of the inmates would chew a hole through them just to get a finger out to jack off with. His worst story was about a psychotic woman in Airedale. She had self-inflicted scars all over her face from scratching herself, self-imposed bite marks all over her body from trying to eat herself, and she had the nasty habit of chewing the inside of her mouth and spitting blood at your eyes and mouth hoping you'd catch one of the myriad of diseases she carried. We had a very tall, heavy-set man who swung at a nurse and a fellow tech when they asked him to not stand naked in the door and flash the whole unit, so we put him in a hold and escorted him to the seclusion room. From there he tried to strangle himself with his underwear. He had them on his head like a bandana, so we opened the door and took those away. Then he peed all over the floor, did push-ups and every time he came down he would slurp it up. Eventually he got bored of that and began writing on the wall in his pee, and then masturbated onto the door and said it would be better if he could duck my dead corpse. He bit me on the hand and drew blood. From there I got permission to not be involved in the code and a peer swapped me out. My sister was actually sectioned earlier this year for her eating disorder and she was right next to the PICU, Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit. One of the nights she heard multiple screams coming specifically from that ward. One of the patients had bit a chunk out of a nurse's leg as they were trying to detain them. They then started eating said chunk. It's crazy to think these types of things happen. We had a Garo psych floor. Crazy old people. One night while passing through, a little old lady popped her head out her doorway and said to me, "I could sure use the company of a good-looking young man tonight. Sorry, I'm not that good-looking." Quick as snot on a doorknob she said, "That's okay, I can't see too well." I didn't join her, but her charisma was on point. I visited a prison for a warden job and went to see the constant surveillance guys, for their own safety etc. There was a fella there who had used a razor to slice his stomach open and started pulling chunks of himself out for fun. He also started using the hole, which wouldn't heal, as a hiding place. A towel was found stuffed in there which his body had started fusing to. Apparently he was quite nice, but the whole thing wasn't for me and I didn't go ahead with applying. Got assigned to child psych ward in a hospital where I worked. Easy gig. Wear street clothes, not much to do but pass out medicines and observe. 15-year-old black kid, overweight, is sitting beside me casually discussing his day when he jumps up, begins screaming like a banshee, flailing around, looks like a seizure on steroids, and I'm befuddled as to how to control him with the situation when after a few minutes of twisting my nerves into a tight ball, he stops, sits back down and begins talking casually again. Had one of his spells. Not sure if anyone has ever been that close to a raving maniac while he's having a fit, but it's disarming to say the least. This guy began to freak out and carved out his intestines with bare hands. Never thought it was possible, but considering him being a former power lifter, maybe it's possible. Guy was like 6 feet 6 inches and has to be kept under constant supervision as he'd once tried to kill a staff with food plates, then he was only given a paper plate and edible crockery. My grandfather got dementia as he aged and got violent. He was 7'1" and a veteran of both World Wars, and had been a trench fighting specialist in World War I, so when he got combative he was very dangerous. He literally thought he was still fighting the Huns. We eventually had to put him in a home. They put him in 4-point restraints and gave him lots of drugs. He hurt nurses, but it was all bruises and the like. As he got older he got a lot weaker, so the restraints were removed and the drugs lessened. Until the day he gouged a nurse's eye out with one of those little plastic basins you spit into at the dentist's. He apparently got hold of one somehow and made a sort of shiv with it. My sister has been a psychiatric nurse for around 10 years or so and has told me all sorts of stories about her times. She is physically assaulted on an almost daily basis, has been threatened with everything you can imagine. People have thrown, smeared or ingested pretty much every bodily fluid available on the wards. She has just finished a degree retraining as a teacher because she no longer enjoys the profession. Not a nurse, but I was a patient in a psych ward. The ward was sectioned into 2 sides based on case severity. I was on the less severe side. One night, an incredibly tall, somewhat muscular man escaped his room on the severe side, got through a door that was supposed to be locked, got into the less severe side, and into my room. I woke up, sat up, and saw him standing in my doorway. He asked in a shaky voice if I was all right. I hesitantly said yes, to which he responded by getting a look of terrified horror and screamed, "I knew it. You can see them too. Don't let them get you." Before he was dragged away screaming by security. I saw a crazy bipolar woman bring a man out of full catatonia with a blowjob. This was years ago, security wasn't as tight as these days. Somehow this extremely manic woman gets into this guy's room. Now the guy, let's call him Gary. Gary has been full catatonic since we got him, couldn't care for himself at all, he would just stare all day long. Well, I guess she must have sucked the depression right out of the guy, because he was right as rain afterward. We found them at the end of the session. Thanks for tuning in to Reddit Streams. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell for more videos. Share your views in the comments below.